Hi, welcome to Watercolor with Leslie. Today we are going to be doing one of my favorite things, which is to mix and match colors. And we're going to just learn a little bit more about how the colors work so that you can achieve the tints and the shades that you are trying to match with the paintings you're making. So today you're going to need some practice watercolor paper. Nothing fancy, but it does need to be watercolor paper so that it will accept the paint and the water. You will need some type of brush. I'm going to use a water brush or an aqua brush, so I don't need a separate cup. But if you are more comfortable using a round watercolor brush, that's fine too. I have here a 12 and a 6. Either's fine since we're just practicing with color today. That is not super important. You also will need a palette where we can mix some colors, and you're going to need 4 main colors, so you don't need as many as I'm showing you. You're going to need a magenta. The type that I have is a quinacridone pink. I will show you that up close in a moment. You also need a yellow, a medium or a light yellow, a blue. This is an ultramarine, but if you have like cobalt or something close, that's fine as well. And then a black. My shade is called neutral tint. But those are the 4 main ones we'll be using. If you have a violet, an orange like permanent orange, and a green like hooker's green, those would also be helpful but not required for what we'll be doing today. So let's get started. So to start today, we're going to go ahead and get all of our color ready, which is just a good practice for watercolor anyway, because once you start painting with watercolor, it starts drying. The color I told you that you would need would be a magenta, and mine here is a quinacridone pink. So I'm going to activate that by putting some water on the dried paint and bringing it over here while I'm squeezing my brush to make a little puddle, so we have that ready. Okay, and we're going to do that with the 4 colors, the quinacridone pink or a magenta, the blue, an ultramarine right here. I'm just squeezing a little water and bringing that paint over, and a yellow, now I also told you need a black or a neutral tint. What do I have right here? So we're having all of our colors ready. Now, I said you could use a green, and if you have that, great, but if you don't have a green on your palette, a nice green, we're gonna go ahead and make one. So I'm going to just take my yellow, and I'm gonna use a little bit lighter blue just so you can see the green better with what we'll be doing with it in a little bit. Yellow and blue mixed up right here. That looks great. And then we're gonna make a violet. Now, you might have noticed I did not say red today, and there's a reason. It's because red is really not a primary color. When you mix red and blue, you will get a beautiful shade of plum, which is not what we want. We want violet. So I'm using my magenta and my blue, and we'll have a beautiful violet paint. And then lastly, of course, our orange. And again, just the magenta. Put that up here. Sometimes you run out of space to mix when you're doing a watercolor. That's all right. Usually don't have this many colors going at once. Okay, so we got a beautiful orange. I'm gonna add a little bit more yellow. Now we are ready to begin. So we're going to just learn how to manipulate a color to make it match whatever it is that you are trying to replicate or paint. And when we're done today, it's a great exercise if you were to find a flower or a leaf and try to actually match that item using these paints, because you should be able to do it with what we're going to do today. Now, I'm going to start with just showing you, we're just going to go back to our pink to begin, and we're just going to make a line of that on our paper so we can see what that looks like all on its own before we have changed it in any way. One of the great things about watercolor that I learned early on was that if I want to lighten a watercolor, you actually don't use white like you would in many other mediums. Because we want to keep that transparency, we're just going to add water to it. I took a little bit of pink here and I've moved it here and I've just added a little water. And that is all you do to lighten any shade that is too dark. So you can see when I put it on here, we've made it substantially lighter just by adding water. That's the first way you can change any of your watercolor shades, and it's the easiest. The second way is if you wanted to darken it. To darken this pink, I'm going to put a little bit right here, and I'm going to come and get some of our neutral tint, or black. Black and the color that you're painting will darken it. And we're just going to see what that does on our paper. So there you go, it's a much darker shade of the same color. Let's say you like the pink, but it's too bright for what you're trying to do. The way we dull any color is that we think about our color wheel back from elementary school, and we look across the color wheel to whatever color's opposite and add a little bit of that color. So for our magenta, we need to add a little bit of green to dull it down. And I'm going to do that right here. You can see now we've kept the same pink, but it's just not quite as bright. It's a lovely shade. For other things you might need to match, you can dull it further by adding additional amounts of green. Another thing you can do is if you need to, you can add the colors on either side of it. I especially enjoy painting with a little bit of pink with a little bit of orange, and it makes a really pretty coral. You can see that alone, just that tiny bit of orange, really affects the shade. Playing around like this, and remember we just started, this is just from 4 colors, and I've already made one color adjust all this many ways. I'm going to go the opposite way. On the other side of my pink is violet, so I'm going to add a little bit of that. And there we go. That one's a little bit watered down, but that maybe you wanted a lighter, more violet shade of that pink. Okay, let's do the same thing, just experimenting now with our blue. We're going to start with just the plain, beautiful blue. I'm going to add a little more. That was a little bit lighter than I intended, which that happens sometimes. And then we know now that if we want to lighten that shade up, we just add a little water. And then we get a beautiful lighter shade. To darken it, we're going to add a little bit of the neutral tint. I'm going to come back and get a little bit more blue since I watered that down. There we go. Let's see what that looks like. Make sure to put enough on there. And then of course now we know how to dull the color. If this blue is lovely but too bright, we'll look opposite on the color wheel and go grab a little of that orange, and we can see how that will dull our blue right down. Just a little bit of orange. Get a good smoky gray. Maybe you don't want it that dull. You can go back a little bit, add a little more blue. Then we can also adjust it by looking at the colors on either side of the color wheel. And I'm going to add then a little bit of violet to our blue. And we get this lovely shade. Or we could add a little green to it. See what we get there. So when I start to paint, before I paint, I look very carefully at what I'm trying to paint, and I try to really see that color for what it is and go and try to match it before I ever begin the painting. Practicing like this, knowing what your colors are going to do when you add water or another color to it, will help you be able to make those matches faster. So here we have just our plain yellow. Then of course we're going to lighten it with a little bit of water. And this is just a fun exercise to do, so you get really familiar with your paint and all of its capabilities. To dull it now, we know that to dull our yellow, we need a little bit of violet. Oh, I skipped the darkening it. I'll go back to that. Here's the dulled yellow. And then let's go back and darken it with a little bit of a neutral tint. There we go. I'm gonna have to get some more since I just used all of mine up. I'm gonna put some plain yellow here, and then we're going to look both colors on either side of the color wheel, so we'll add a little orange and see what we can do with our color there. That's awesome. And then I'm gonna make one more little bit of plain yellow, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of green. So we're just going all over. So there we go. So this, all these lovely shades are just from our 4 colors that we started with, and that means there's an infinite number in between all of them, because you can take your dulled down and make it darker or lighter. You can add more or less orange, more or less green, and you can adjust these colors to whatever you need. So now, to leave you today, I'd like you to find one specific item, preferably from nature like a leaf or a flower, and see if you can match the shade using the colors and the things that you've learned today about what those colors are going to do and what they need to get that exact color. Thanks for joining us here on Watercolor with Leslie, and we'll see you next time.